I know it's only the fourth day of the new season. However, I was able to make Mythic already with a mono red list. I call it Sneak Attack Mono Red. It's in Historic, and I hit number 72 right now in Mythic. So that's first time for me ever being ranked. Huge, huge accomplishment. And I definitely think this is right now the best list to be playing for Red in best of one. Usually I'm a best of three player, um, but I was really, really struggling in best of three for the first 2 days on the ladder. Everyone right now is prepared for the burn matchup um, and the hazard matchup. And I realized it just everything felt a little too slow, or I felt like we were running out of gas and we weren't able to get anything on the board. I also felt like some of the creatures we were playing really didn't provide too much to our overall strategy. Um, so about a day ago, a day and a half ago, I really just started brainstorming deck lists for a solid 3 hours. I just was putting deck lists together and trying them out in best of one and seeing what was working, what wasn't. And then I discovered this list. I literally just brewed, and lo and behold, it took me all the way to Mythic today. Destroys a lot of the meta. There's one or two tough decks to face, but you very rarely see them right now in best of one. And it feels super super smooth. And so yeah, let's get into it. So quick overview. We're going to go over the deck list. I'm going to give you some advice on how to play the deck, and then we're going to go into an analysis on just about every single matchup right now in the meta. I'm talking like probably 16 different decks, and then a quick conclusion. So here's my proof. Literally, you can see it there, September 2020, my gamer tag, and then what do you know, Mythic number 72. So let's go over the list. So the list plays 4 champions, 2 magma sprays, 4 shocks, 4 soul scar mages, and 4 tin tree dodgers. So as you can see there, or my bad, 2 tin tree dodgers. Um, so that is 10 1-drops. The reason why I play the Dodger over the Lavamancer is the Dodger allows us to sneak in for that 1 mana for direct damage. And as you can see, we have Emberclave, and that can lead to be 4 damage in a turn. That can just win games, super late game. Awesome card. I also play the Fervent Champion because of First Strike. Going against some of the more creature-oriented decks, having a First Striker that can be a 2/1, and sometimes with Emberclave can be bigger, just takes out a lot of the creatures we see currently running around the format. I included 2 Magma Spray here. The reason I did it is there's a lot of mana dorks kind of floating around in the meta, and it really hurts our opponents for those strategies as they're trying to ramp into something to kill those mana dorks. So the 2 Magma Sprays and the 4 Shocks just take care of that. Nothing to worry about. Next is Lightning Strike. 4 Lightning Strike either go straight to the face as a bolt or to try and get rid of some of their bigger creatures. Um, Soulscar Mage plus any of those burn spells is super, super nice with the -1/-1 counters, and there's a couple interactions we'll get into later. Robber of the Rich, awesome card in the mirror or against Goblins or against any creature deck. If you're running out of gas, you're able to play Robber of the Rich, attack, and you're able just to kind of get a creature from your opponent or a spell from your opponent and play it. It is really, really fun to get a collected company off Robber of the Rich. I will say that is one of my favorite cards to hit off that. Next is Steamkin. Steamkin is an absolute monster. The way it works is it either gets rid of a removal spell from your opponent's hand that they should be using in our 3-drop slot that they won't because they use it on Steamkin, or if they don't, Steamkin can just grow absurd and it can lead to a massive board for us, which is awesome. Really good utility card there. Next is Annex. Annex, I think, is probably the best card in this deck. That or Emberclave. So Annex allows us to get a really big creature on the board, which a lot of decks can't deal with. It also allows for when we attack with it, Emberclave to bump it up by 3, which is huge. And right now, there's a lot of board wipes and control decks out there. So having a big board state with Annex allows us to get left behind a ton of tokens, right? 1/1 tokens. And then if we have Castle Embereth out, we're able to pump up those tokens and basically get in for double the value. So usually it'll be like 3 to 5 tokens. So instead of getting for 3 to 5, we're able to get in for 6 to 10, and in most cases, that can just win the game. Um, and it also having to make our opponents use their wrath effects as we play Annex. We're already able to chip in for some damage, and this just kind of finishes it. Chain Whirler is awesome against the creature heavy decks, the mirror match, and the tribal decks, and Junsack. So we'll get into that more later, but that card was also an all-star. And the 3 mana drop for the 3 red, it also helps with the Annex. Next is the all-star, Emberclave. There are no decks right now prepared for an Emberclave. The amount of times I'm able just to swing out and play Emberclave on an Annex or a Chain Whirler or one of the 1-drops and just win the game is insanely high. Definitely one of the most slept on cards out right now, especially in Historic. Everyone's prepared for the burn matchup. No one is ready for this super aggro list. And Emberclave just is able to capitalize games. And most opponents just have no clue what to do. Next, we play 17 Mountains, and we play 3 Castle Embereth. The reason why we play 3 instead of 4, I kind of noticed that when we were playing 4, we were kind of getting some clunky hands to start with it, like double Embereth. So I switched to 3, and it felt just a lot smoother. I mean, you can switch it up and play 4 if you want. Personally, for me, I just chose 3. So let's go through. I played the list only in best of ones. Once I noticed I was just cooking with this list in best of ones, I think I went 6-0 the night I started testing it, and it was against all the meta dominant decks. I knew something was up with this list. I didn't even bother throwing in a sideboard. I just kept it as is. So I went 29-14 with the list in platinum, and I went 65-34 with the list in diamond. One thing to note is at the beginning of each rank, I always play a best of 3 game, just to kind of get myself to jump up 2 spots in whatever new rank I'm in. Um, so that's why the math obviously doesn't add up there. But it's just a super fast deck. I will say the biggest thing is super important to hit a 3rd land drop. You never keep a hand with less than 2 mana. 2 mana is the minimum for this deck for a hand keep. Emberclave, already crazy. And the other thing too is this deck just wins games turn 4 almost every game, and if it doesn't, you have stuff in the back to deal with a mid-range game. I don't think I've really had any super long games, and that includes control lists. So this deck is just awesome. So now let's kind of go into some of the matchups. The first one is Elves. I was still seeing a decent amount of Elves. I know this was a really popular deck in the August meta. For this meta right now in September, I'm still seeing a decent amount of it. I played against a good amount in Diamond and Platinum. The trick here, outrace the opponent. We have all the 1-drops and the 2-drops that just allow us to get in and attack. Most of the time, our opponents aren't going to block with their Elves. So we're able just to get in for some free damage. The other thing too is we always want to kill their mana dorks. Their mana dorks are insanely important for their list. The other thing, always kill their lords. This is kind of the same strategy for goblins. If you let their lords sit, their cards get too big and you can't deal with them. Also, Allosaurus Rider, or Allosaurus Shepherd, my bad. If that card ever hits the battlefield, kill it. Because they are able to sometimes generate that 6 mana and swing in for 30, and you just got to use chump blockers. So I had that happen to me once. Luckily, I was able to get out of it with the top deck Emberclave, but most games, be careful about that. That was my learning lesson there. Also, if you notice they have 4 mana up, if you have a big creature board and you have removal spells, you can attack. If you notice you don't have those and you don't have a clave, do not attack. Just let them play the Collected Company. You are walking into your creatures just getting destroyed. Chain Whirler here is amazing when obviously they don't have a Lord out. Just about everything in their list is a 1/1. And even if it is a 2/1, you're able to probably with a Soulscar Mage just get some minus counters on it and just go through. I consider this a great matchup. Really didn't have any difficulties with it except for the one Allosaurus Shepherd match. But after that, I took the note and didn't make that mistake again. So yeah, pretty easy win for this deck. Next is Mono Black Aggro. This is definitely there's 2 versions of it I've seen around. The more common one right now that everyone seems to be playing is the God Pharaoh's Artifact combo. So really be prepared for that. Watch out for that. And yeah, so we'll go into that a little bit more. So always kill their Death Touch and Lifelink creatures, whether it's Murderous Rider, and I still don't know the name of it. It's the 2-drop 2/3 Death Touch, Lifelink card. Whenever those cards hit, always use your removal on it. Those cards can really throw off our game plan and synergy with the deck. If they play Obliterator, don't touch it. Let it keep attacking for 5 and let it tap. For Phyrexian Obliterator, it's okay for us to take 5, but it's not okay for us to lose 5 permanents. For God Pharaoh's Gift right now, I've been considering right now adding 1 Abrade in the Lightning Strike slot. I'm not sure if I'm going to. We'll see. But that combo is really, really good against our deck. The one thing to note is they rely heavily on getting cards in the graveyard. So they'll play Stitcher Supplier and stuff. I've seen opponents attack with it. Just let it come through. We do not want to keep letting them load up the graveyard. But most of the time, we're kind of able to outrace it a little bit. But sometimes they are able to get the combo off and get up 13-13 Fiend Artesian out on turn 3, and we just can't do anything about that. But if we are on the play and we are able to get an Annex out turn 3, we're off just to a really, really quick start. And usually we'll either have 2 to 3 creatures out with it, and our opponent kind of just falls behind because, like I said, they kind of operate with creatures in the graveyard if they're playing the graveyard deck. And then if they're not playing the God Pharaoh's combo and they're playing more the creature base, a lot of those decks aren't able to deal with a lot of the creatures on the board, especially when we're able to pump it up. And a lot of them do have First Strike, whether it be Chain Whirler. So a lot of different routes to go about there. But I kind of consider this a 50-50 matchup because one card that most of these lists always play is Thoughtseize. And Thoughtseize does really do a lot of damage against our list. Being able to take one of our 3 drops early or an Emberclave early in our opening hand just is really, really hard to recover from. So yeah, pretty cool list. Goblins. Goblins has been, hey, thank you for the follow, Sack and Flames. Goblins. Goblins is probably one of the easier matchups. Still lose a bit of games to it. Probably not as many as you would with Burn. I think Burn has a much greater matchup against Goblins, but I still think this deck wins probably every 3 out of 4 games you play against it. So obviously the same strategy here. Get your 1-drops out early. Soulscar Mage, Fervent Champion, whatever it may be, and just attack. They are not going to block with their 1-drops. They utilize the 1-drops for the Skirk Prospectors and their lures that they play. The next thing is your bolts, so those magma sprays, your shocks, your lightning strikes, use them against Skirk Prospector. That is literally the best card in their deck, other than Muxus. That is how they get to Muxus. If they have to go to the 6 land plan, we're winning the game. If they aren't able to kind of cheat in Muxus, we're able to just we're too aggressive for them to be able to do anything. So obviously, just kill the lords and kill the Skirk Prospectors, because all of them are either 2 or less power, which we can deal with. And even if they get a Krenko out, this is kind of one of the cool things I've learned. Let them activate Krenko, because they'll tap it. They'll play a lot of their 1/1s, and by the time, like, that's probably a little bit later, turn 4 or 5. Play your Chain Whirler. Everything gets wiped. You probably have an Annex out, or you have a bunch of creatures out, and you're able just to swing in for a ton while they got 1 Goblin out. The next thing too is to mention with that, with Krenko, is be a little bit concerned with Conspicuous Snoop. It is really important to kill that card. It's kind of nice for them to have it out and see if they have a land or a Goblin out, but I have played against it where they have Snoop out and then they have Krenko on top, and it's like turn 3 and they're able to generate like 3 or 4 Goblins off it. So Chain Whirler is good there too, but just be a little bit careful for the Snoop. But like I said, this is generally a pretty favorable matchup for our deck as well. Next is Soul Sisters. I'm not really seeing a lot of Soul Sisters run around. I went 2-3 against Soul Sisters for the past day and a half, 2 days for making Mythic. The advice I can give there is really kill those 1-drops. If they get Soul Warden out, kill it. If they get, I'm blanking on the bird, that's a 1/1 with flying and lifelink, kill it. Anything you see that allows them to gain life, just kill. We have 10 removal spells, utilize them. Also, attack with your creatures. In this deck, because they have lifelink, some of their creatures do, they are willing to block and let their creature die so they can get life. Their whole game plan revolves around them having 25 or more life. So being able just to let it get through, get rid of their creatures, and just build a board is very, very good. This is kind of where Burn struggled. I do consider it a difficult matchup, but if you know how to play it right, it's not as difficult. Also, Emberclave just ends the game. If you are able to put an Emberclave on a creature, you are dealing 5 or 6 damage a turn that they just cannot stop. And like I said, they're playing life gain, and they kind of realize at that point their life gainers aren't able to gain them life. They're actually net losing life there. So that's pretty important. Also, Steamkin. They don't play removal spells in this list, really. Steamkin is able to get to its 3 counters in a 4/4 pretty quickly. Utilize those counters to build a board or play your Emberclave. Super, super important. And like I said, that last point there is massive. The more the board is cleared out for our creatures, the better. Goblin Chainwhirler is awesome in this list. They play a bunch of 1/1s. Utilize it for sure. Annex, still really good late game. Emberclave can just end the game quick. So like I said, I put down it's a difficult matchup um, in case you just don't know how to play it. But like I said, if you're able to follow this game plan, I think you can make it probably a 60-40 matchup in our favor. This is one of my least favorite decks in Best of One. Played a lot against it. However, if you know how to play it right, kind of like Soul Sisters, it goes in our favor. Use your removal spells on the Ornithopter, the Core Spirit Dancer, and the Adantos Vanguard. Zoros Auroras literally revolves around those 3 cards. Those are the 3 main cards that they like to put their enchantments on and just grow the creatures. If you're able to deal with them, they're relying on their pretty small 1-drops for their enchantment spells. And I will say too, kill if they get the dog out and you got double removal in hand and they haven't equipped an enchantment. Bolt the dog first. They'll sack the dog in response to protect one of these 3 cards, and then you can bolt the other. And one of the biggest things here too is the Adantos Vanguard. Remember, they have to pay 4 life to make it indestructible. Something just about I've seen 90% of Zoros Aurora opponents not realize is that Soulscar Mage puts -1/-1 counters. So it doesn't matter that they pay the 4 life. If we're able to bolt it or lightning strike it, it still is going to die from the -1/-1 counters. So that's just a kind of a cheap way to get an extra 4 damage. It's a free risk factor, is the way I look at it. The other cool thing here is utilize the 1-drops. They aren't going to block with those 1/1s they have out. They need those to protect their bigger threats. So we're allowed to chip in for probably really early, I'd say probably between 3 and 6 damage with those 1-drops. Also, Chain Whirler on turn 3, if they don't have a Spirit Dancer out and they don't have a Thopter out, can just wipe their board and it sets them way too far back to win. Also, let's say they are able to get a big creature out. Annex and Emberclave can go toe to toe with them. I've had an 8/3 Annex block their like one of their 8 toughness Core Spirit Dancers before and win the game. Same with Emberclave. I've attached an Emberclave to a Chain Whirler and let it go in for 8, and our opponent just didn't block because they thought they had win next turn. Emberclave just catches way too many people off guard, and especially in this deck, it allows us to go toe to toe with those massive enchanted creatures that they play. Other thing, like I said, be careful of Indestructible. They have 2 cards that let you do it on the big creatures, so don't go wasting your removal on it early. Kind of kill those creatures and force them to use it. Also, Luris, kill it when it hits the board. Do not give it time to even go get a creature out. Just kill it. That card is bonkers. Don't even let it resolve. Well, you have to let it resolve, but just bolt it. Like I said, probably at every 4 games I played, I was winning 3 against this list. Sometimes they just get a bonkers hand and you can't do anything, and that's magic. We had the same thing in our deck. So, yeah, really like this matchup. This one's a little bit more tough. Mono green aggro. This deck is currently dominating in standard, and it's, like I said, really, really good. But it's really important. It is a winnable match, but they do play big creatures, which can be tough for this list. Burn does, I'd probably say, a little bit better than our list against mono green aggro. But our list can take this. So they play a lot of mana dorks. Kill them. Do not let in any deck you see a mana dork, kill the mana dork. It sets them back a turn. Annex is an all-star here. All their creatures are about 4 power toughness or greater. Look at Ronus, it's a 5/5, and it requires everything to be 4 or greater. You got to deal with those. And the only way you can deal with those, right, is with your Annex, your Goblin Chain Whirler and Emberclave. Those 12 cards right there we have in our deck are able to deal with those big creatures if they get out. Also, remember, they have to spend a lot of time, they got to spend a lot of mana just to get one big creature out, right? So by turn 3, they could have only one creature out. By our turn 3, we could have 4 or 5 out. And when that's the case, we have such a wide board, it's okay to attack. Sure, you might lose a creature, but you're able to get in for 4 or 5 points of damage. And especially if you got an Emberclave in hand, you can just win the game. So don't be scared just because they have big creatures to attack. You can still attack and get in for damage, which is huge against this deck. As sure, on the swing back, they might hit for 5, but we're able to do the same thing with our small creatures. And if they do that, they can just open the door for an Emberclave or a pump on the Castle Embereth. So pretty important there. Also, some of these lists are playing Germgrazer. Be careful because it does kill Annex, and that is their one solution to dealing with our massive threat to deal with their big creatures. Also, I put here Ronus's GGs. If they are able to get Ronus out and have a 5/5 that we can't deal with, it is pretty hard to deal with Ronus. So I think I'm 1-3 in games where they've played Ronus. I have to look at my notes. But games that they're not able to get Ronus out, let's say Steel Leaf Champion or Lovestruck Beast or Yorbo, we're able to handle it pretty well. So I consider this a 50-50 matchup. Next is Mono Green Walkers. I was having a lot of trouble with this list last season, and this season I've been dominating against it. What I've learned is they heavily rely on their mana dorks. They rely on their mind stones, and they kind of just leave the board open until turn 4 or 5. So kill the mana dorks, rinse and repeat. I've said this multiple times. Do not let Land War Elves just sit on the battlefield. That is your sign that your opponent has something big in hand that they are going to play. Also, building out a board against this deck is huge. They don't play a lot of creatures. So the more we're able to build out a board instead of just burning to the face, we're able just to win the game a lot quicker. If we have 5 creatures out and they just go for a Karn, let's say, on their turn 4 while we have 5 out on ours, and let's say we have Castle Embereth out, we're dealing probably close to 12 or 14 points of damage while they just went and got one artifact. So pretty useful information there to remember. We're also a little bit too fast. A lot of their planeswalkers are 4 or 5 mana. So I've seen it where on turn 6, we'll have our opponent probably down to 6, and we'll have a bunch of creatures out. They'll play Nissa, and we're able to lightning strike their land and just get in for big points of damage. So I put here, always go after the planeswalkers. Depending on your board state, go after the planeswalkers. If they're holding a ton of cards in hand, go after the planeswalkers. If they're not, just go straight for them. That means they're out of gas. So I consider this another 75-25 matchup. Definitely in our favor for sure. Next is Gruul Aggro. Last season, I considered this deck near impossible. I really struggled against this deck. I have a solid 2.5 pages of notes on how to play this deck. And it is winnable now. And I actually have started to notice I'm winning a lot more against it than I am losing against it. Like I said before, this deck plays Land War Elves. Kill it. They play a ton of big creatures. They play Bone Crusher Giant. They play your Questing Beast. They play Glorybringer, right? It's kind of similar to Mono Green where they rely heavily on their big creatures. If we're able to build up the board state early and get rid of the mana dorks, they're already behind. And at that point, we're able to already get in for a good chunk of damage. Also, Annex is able to go toe-to-toe with their big creatures like I've mentioned before. And also, Annex plus Emberclave, they don't have first strikers here, remember that, just shuts down the game completely. Also, similar strategy is if you aren't able to get Annex out, but they do have a big creature out and you got a small board, do not be afraid to attach an Emberclave to a small creature, as that creature will most likely get through, and it'll get through for about 4 or 5 points 4 to 6 points of damage. So that's absolutely huge. So yeah, I consider this matchup a 60-40. I used to have it at near impossible with the old burn lists and the old mono red aggro list. They were a little bit slower and they all were concerned about going to the face. This deck is not worried about that. This deck is worried about building out the board, and this is building out the board right now is super good against these big creature strategies. And these decks really struggle with it, where they didn't really struggle against the burn matchups anymore. These creatures in our deck now are much, much more efficient. So yeah, I consider it 60-40. Um, Before today, I'd probably say it was 50-50, but after playing against it today and just really understanding the matchup now, it's definitely a little bit in our favor, but it's not a ton. Next is Sultai Uro. I played against this deck way too much the first 2 days of the season, and even in best of ones, I'm seeing it all over the place. It is the best deck right now um, in historic, and I couldn't figure out how to beat it for the life of me until I realized they rely heavily on removal spells and ramp. And the one thing is they like to use the removal spells I learned late in the game. So how do we beat that? This is where you send all your bolts upstairs. They aren't playing mana dorks in these lists. They are trying to set up to get to that 4 or 5 land drop. So how do we beat that? We play our 1 drops, we play our 2 drops, and we get in as quick as we can. Steamkin is an awesome bait card here. They play Heartless Act or they play Eliminate usually. And the way to deal with that is putting out Steamkin. If we have a 1 drop out, they'll utilize their one or they usually only have 1 or 2 removal spells a game is what I'm noticing. They'll utilize their removal spell on the Steamkin, which opens up the door for us to play one of our 3 drops on turn 3, and our opponent just gets super, super caught off guard at that point. So that's just an awesome little trick to know. And Annex is super, super good in this matchup too, because it's able to go toe to toe with Uro. Also, if they're playing the removal spells early, let's say on turn 2, turn 3, that means they're not ramping. That also means that sets their deck back a little bit because they rely on getting a lot of mana out to play some of their bigger threats like Nissa and like Uro. Um, so that's super, super good for us as they're more concerned with dealing with the board. And at that point, when they're able even to get an Uro out or they're able to get a Nissa out, they're so low on life, and we already have such a big board that we're able just to get through for a ton of points of damage. I honestly consider this a great matchup now. Very good matchup. And on the other side of the coin, I have Bant Uro. You can also call this. I didn't include Teamer Uro because I've only played it twice. But you could kind of throw Teamer Uro in with this list as well. So for Bant Uro and the Bant control decks, all the bolts go upstairs. Throw them right at your opponent. They're not really playing creatures. Same strategy. Be aggressive with the creatures. Also, always keep a hand if you have Annex. If you have Annex, that means you are going to be able to get around their board wipes. I have won games where on turn 3, I'll have 3 1-drops out and an Annex out. At this point, when it gets beat, I probably get in for I get in for about 5 to 6 points of damage. They're at 14. They play their board wipe turn 4. We get 5 1/1s on the battlefield. And then, especially if you have Cashel Embreth out, you're able to get in for 10 points of damage the next turn. And our opponents just have no way of dealing with that. Whereas the old burn lists, our creatures weren't able to be super aggressive and they were able just to kill it, and we get sit back way, way too many turns. So this is just, I consider this awesome, especially with Annex. Always keep your hands with Annex here. Throw your bolts up, and most of the time, our opponents are more worried about trying to deal with our board state. And due to them just having to see Annex, I've seen a lot of opponents now. The second we play Annex and we have a good board, they just scoop, even if they have a board wipe, just because they realize Annex plus even Emberclave in the back for 1/1s or whatever, we're just getting in for way too much damage in the mid game, I'd say, after we've already got in for a ton of damage in the front. So this is an awesome, awesome matchup for us. I think I went 8-1 against Uro decks. Um, so that was huge, huge, huge for us. Oh, next is Azorius and Esper Control. Um, this is a pretty, I'd say this is a little bit more of a difficult matchup for us. I gave it a 50-50 just because we're able to play pretty quick. But if it goes late game, we just can't win. So the trick here is you got to be super aggressive with your creatures again. And before turn 4, send all your bolts upstairs. After turn 4, they most likely have a Teferi. Just start bolting the Teferi. Don't let the Teferi, you cannot really let sit on the board for too long. Like I said, build out the board state, similar plan to ban Uro. They rely a ton. I misspelled that. Counters. Wow. But they really rely on their counter spells, their absorbs, their sensors in those early turns. So the one drops allow us to kind of get around that. And most of the time, they don't want to counter a one drop because they're like, this card won't do anything to us. And by the time they get to turn 3 and they play something, we're able to drop an Annex. And once that Annex drops, right, they'll have a board wipe in hand. It could be a Wrath of God, Sell the Wreckage, whatever they have. And we're just uh, yeah, they just have a board drop, and at that point, same thing I said before with Uro, we get too many creatures out. They're already down to 10 or 12 life already from our first couple turns, and it's just too much to deal with for them. I will say if it goes late game, and that strategy doesn't really play out, very rarely do I see it. They get Dream Trawler out, and the second that comes out, you can just hit concede. You're not beating Dream Trawler with this list. Um, And the reason I gave this a 50-50 is on the draw, this is a little bit harder to win compared to the Euro decks. Even on the draw, I felt pretty comfortable. Here, it's a little bit harder because of all the counter spells they play. On the play, this is a pretty easy game to win. So yeah, definitely one of the more tricky matchups in the meta right now for this list. This list I absolutely hate. I have played it. I think I played it this morning 7 times, and I only beat it twice. Very, very hard. So the combo here is 9 lives and Solemnity. The way it works is Solemnity doesn't let you. I can't pronounce the word. It's a 3-drop as well, and permanents you control basically can't have counters put on them. Well, if that's the case here, as you can read 9 lives, is once you get 9 counters on it, 9 lives lose the game. However, it lets you prevent 9 points of damage based, not 9 points of damage, but 9 forms of damage um, going to your life total. Well, the combo here obviously is if you get a Solemnity out and you have 9 lives, you can't get any counters on the 9 lives, and it gets indestructible unless you have enchantment removal for the Solemnity. So it's a pretty hard to deal with. The only way I beat it was I actually hit 9 counters on the 9 lives before they were able to get Solemnity out. So what you have to do here is keep all your creature heavy hands. That is basically a repetitive form of damage. Um, whereas lightning strike or a shock or something is only one type of damage. Whereas a creature can probably go 2 turns before they get a Solemnity out. So you literally just got to get all your haste creatures out and your low 1-drop, 2-drop creatures out instead of your big 3-drops here, and just go in for a ton of damage as quick as you can. Because the second they get the combo out, we just lose. Also, be careful if they have 1 out. Let's say they have 9 lives out, and they don't have Solemnity out, but they have 4 mana up. Don't attack with everything. Send in your weakest creatures probably, because they do play Settle the Wreckage. So be very careful of that. Settle the Wreckage could literally wipe your whole board, and at that point, you're not able to beat 9 lives. So like I said, this is a really difficult match for us. We don't play any enchantment removal. So if you get it, play it out, see if you can get that quick win. But the second they get combo out, it's okay to concede. This is a really tough matchup for a deck. Every deck has them. Next is Rakdos Pyromancer. For some reason, this deck always gives me problems. Even with the old burn lists, I was always having a hard time with this deck. And the funny part is, this is the other deck I play right now. Game plan, you got to be super aggressive. When they get Dreadhorde Arcanist out, you got to Lightning Strike it. Stitcher Supplier, be careful with. And their Archfiend, you got to be careful with. Let them attack with the Archfiend. They get 1 life out of it, but we're able to kind of get around it. And if they get the Demon out off the Archfiend, Emberclave and Annex can deal with the Demon very well. So just a reminder there. Also, turn 1 Thoughtseize can really kill our game plan here. Also, if they do get Lurrus, same strategy as before, always kill Lurrus. I cannot stress that enough. Lurrus in this deck is absolutely bonkers, so you cannot let it sit. Also, Young Pyromancer is completely fine to hit because we got Chain Rollers. If they get the Pyromancer out and they get the Elementals out, we got a way to deal with it. I have beaten this deck before, just with some really fast hands, and our opponent getting a little unlucky with the graveyard. But this deck plays a ton of just a ton of hand disruption that our deck just kind of struggles with. So yeah, I consider it near impossible just because they almost always have Thoughtseize or Croxa, which really just kind of gets off our game plan a little bit. Um, but if they don't have those, we're able to win it. So that's pretty important. So yeah, it is near impossible, but you can probably sneak out a win or two every now and then against this list. So these are two different forms of the same deck, basically. Rakdos Sacrifice plays the Oven and the Cat combo, whereas Jund relies a lot more on Bolas's Citadel and Blood Artist. So what I've learned is they are definitely two completely different matchups that our deck does very well against and really bad against. So the trick is with both, with those early creatures, start going in. Most of the time, those early drops they play, they aren't going to deal with. For Jund, kill the mana dorks. They play Goose and they play Land War Elves. Kill them both. For Rakdos, we don't really have to worry about that too much. Um, Also, watch out for Thoughtseize. The Rakdos list does play Thoughtseize. I haven't seen it a ton in the Jund list so far. So be very, very careful with that, as Thoughtseize really disrupts our plan with this current list. Um, Also, when they get Woe Strider out, kill it. That allows them to sacrifice and scry for answers. Super, super important. Also, if they get Mayhem Devil out, I know they don't really play it. I haven't really seen it too much in the Jund list, surprisingly. But in the Rakdos list, you always got to kill the Mayhem Devil, as that is their main way of dealing damage to clear your board of creatures and also deal damage to you directly. Chain Whirler here in the Jund matchup, I think, is absolutely amazing. Kills the Elf, kills the Go tokens, kills the Blood Artist, and if you have a Soulscar Mage out, it starts putting counters on their creatures for -1/-1 that we're able just to attack through and let the board open. Also, in both matchups, Emberclave just ends the game completely. Similar to us, they don't play really, really big creatures. So when we're able to get an Emberclave out on a creature, it is very, very difficult for them to deal with. So yeah, that's Emberclave is an all-star here for both matches. For the Jund matchup, be careful. If they have 4 mana open, they almost certainly have a Collected Company, and they can combo off that Collected Company due to the static sacrifice effects most of the cards in their deck have. So be very, very careful about that. And the way to get around that is hold your removal up in hand if you notice they do. Don't go start throwing it to the face. Let them play the Collected Company, attack with your creatures, and utilize the removal effectively. That will almost always get around Collected Company. So for Rakdos Oven, I consider it near impossible just because they're able to combo off so quick. Jund, I feel a lot better with because they rely a little bit more on the mana dorks to build their board state. So Jund, I play very, very well against. Rakdos, very, very difficult for us. Luckily, I'm not seeing a ton of Rakdos. I'm seeing a lot more Jund right now in the ladder. So if you stick to those game plans, the game plan listed above, you should be able to beat Jund uh, the majority of the time. Rakdos Oven is going to be a little bit more difficult. And part of the reason, like I said before, I am thinking about adding 1 or 2 Abrades is to utilize it for the Witch's Oven. Shutting down a Witch's Oven is super, super good, as it is one of our worst matchups. And I think that could probably make the matchup go a little bit more close towards 40-60 for us, a little bit more winnable. Next is Doom Foretold. Um, this deck I absolutely hated to play against last season. I don't think I won a single game against it last season. There's a really popular YouTube video on my page against it, where I kind of put Doom Patrol, if anyone knows superheroes, instead of Doom Foretold for the art, and it got a ton of views because I just got absolutely smacked 2 games in a row as a burn deck to Doom Foretold. The reason why Doom Foretold, we have a better matchup now against Doom Foretold than we did with our burn list is because we're playing a more creature heavy deck. We're able to get more permanents on the battlefield. Remember, Doom Foretold relies on them having their enchantments out to sacrifice to Doom Foretold and then playing Urion to kind of blink those and just keep rinsing and repeating, more of a prison style lockdown. So how do we beat that? Well, we're able to play a lot more creatures this game. We're able to play a lot more creatures on the board and build a big board. so that when they do get, let's say, to turn 4 with a Doom Foretold, we maybe only lose 1 or 2 creatures. And when it comes to sacrificing, they're having to sacrifice some of their enchantments too, while we're able just to sacrifice one of our creatures, and we're able to play an even bigger creature with Annex. So here I say, um, always keep a hand with Annex. Um, it's very, very, very good against this list. You're able to play a big creature out, and of course you have little creatures. So when you have to sacrifice the little creatures, you're able to get a token out, and then you can just sacrifice a token. So that's a really, really cool strategy. I noticed a lot of the Doom Foretold lists I played against whenever I played Annex just scooped because they knew I could just sacrifice a creature and sacrifice a token and just rinse and repeat, which is really, really good against this. Um, Somehow I put this here, and I've seen it twice. These decks are now playing Dream Trawler. Be careful about that. I have no idea where it came from. But I've lost to Dream Trawler twice now when I even had a good board state against Doom Foretold. So be very, very careful about that. Not sure if all lists are playing it, but I saw it twice. Usually, if I see it one time, I kind of disregard it. But now that I've seen it twice, I'm very, very cautious of Dream Trawler now in the Doom Foretold list. So the reason this is a 40-60 matchup is if we're on the draw, this gets a little bit harder to deal with and build a bigger board state due to their removal. However, if we're on the play, we're able to build too big of a board for them to really deal with, and we usually win. So I have this at 40-60. I should probably change this to 50-50. It's literally just a coin toss now, which is way, way better than where it was before with the burn list. And that's it. The one list I just realized I didn't have on here that I do want to wrap up is Spirits and Mono Blue. I only played against Mono Blue once in the ladder, surprisingly, once or twice. And we just kind of get around it. We have too big of creatures. Mono Blue relies heavily on the same old 1 or 2 creatures. And because we're able to build out a big board and they rely on counter spells, and we have really small creatures, we're able just to build out a big board that they can't deal with. So I think Mono Blue is a really, really favorable matchup for us. Spirits is kind of the same thing as before as some of the other tribal decks. Kill the lords. Don't worry about their small creatures. Keep attacking, as most of the time they want to keep it out because their spirits trigger other spirits. I consider probably spirits a 75-25 matchup for sure. If you stick to the tribal deck strategy game plan, you'll be able to beat spirits. So yeah, thank you for tuning in. Like I said, this is right now, I definitely think this list is the best list right now for mono red and best of ones. I think the win rate proves it. The win rate is around 67-68% with this list. You will lose games. It happens. It's magic. But for best of one, this deck is just super, super quick. And a lot of the decks in the meta right now are not equipped with strategies to beat this list. I'm going to work on a best of 3 list for this deck, as I traditionally always play best of 3. I recently just shifted to best of 1 just because of how hot this deck was 2 nights ago. So yeah, if anyone has any questions, feel free to ask. Feel free to leave them in the comment section of the video when I post it. And yeah, so I'll open it up real quick. Any questions for me about the list? Alrighty. So yeah, just keep definitely, if you get the chance, leave some questions in the comment section. I will 100% answer them. And yeah, take care, everyone. I'll have the MTGA updated list, MTGA zone updated list posted probably today or tomorrow for everyone to go check out. And yeah, thanks for tuning in, everyone. This was a great time, and I'll see you later.